Emeka asked quietly, "When you called me your uncle, was it because you were ashamed to tell them I was the man paying for everything?" Blessing crossed her arms and replied that she did not owe him marriage because he had supported her education. She said she was prepared to repay every amount he had spent. The statement struck him harder than the rejection. For years, he had believed his sacrifice was an expression of love. Blessing had reduced it to a loan that could be calculated and returned. Emeka closed the ring box. The roses slipped from his hand and fell across the pavement. He looked at Blessing's mother, who was weeping, and then back at Blessing. "Keep the money," he said. "I did not educate you because I wanted to buy a wife. But one day, when the things you are chasing finally showed their true value, remember that I stood here and offered you a home." Emeka walked through the crowd without looking back. Nobody laughed. Even Blessing's classmates appeared uncomfortable. Cynthia took Blessing's hand and told her she had been brave. Blessing smiled, but her body was trembling. She had expected freedom to feel powerful. Instead, she felt as if she had stepped away from solid ground. Her mother slapped her across the face in front of everyone. She asked how a degree could remove gratitude from a person's heart. Blessing replied that Emeka had helped her willingly and could not use the assistance to control her future. Her mother said the issue was not the marriage proposal, but the cruelty which Blessing had rejected him. Blessing refused to apologize. She said Chief Femi was coming to collect her and that everyone would understand when they saw the kind of man she had chosen. Blessing called Femi repeatedly. He did not answer. She sent a message saying he had finally ended her relationship with Emeka. There was no response. 2 hours later, while her classmates were leaving with their families, she called again. This time, a woman answered. The voice was calm and mature. Blessing asked to speak with Chief Femi. The woman asked who was calling. Blessing hesitated and said she was one of his business associates. The woman replied, I am his wife. He is bathing. What business do you have with my husband on a Saturday afternoon? Blessing ended the call immediately. She stood behind the graduation hall, struggling to breathe. She had known Femi was married, but hearing his wife's voice destroyed the story she had created. A separated man did not normally bathe comfortably in his family home, while his supposed future partner waited for him at a graduation. Femi returned Blessing's call that evening. He was angry. He was angry that she had contacted his private number repeatedly. Blessing told him she had rejected Emeka publicly and asked when he would arrive. Femi said he had never promised to attend. Blessing reminded him of the apartment and job he had discussed. Femi replied that he would assist when convenient, but warned her not to pressure him. She asked whether he truly planned to marry her. There was a long silence before he laughed. He said, Blessing, you are an intelligent young woman. Do not turn a pleasant relationship into something it was never meant to be. Blessing felt the ground open beneath her. She reminded him that he had spoken about their future. Femi said talking about possibilities was not a marriage agreement. When she began crying, he told her that he was with his family, and ended the call. That night, Blessing sat alone inside her hostel room while other graduates celebrated. The expensive wig, jewelry, and dress she had purchased for the day suddenly looked meaningless. She called Cynthia, who assured her that wealthy men often became afraid when women demanded commitment. Cynthia advised her to give Femi time. Blessing wanted to believe that explanation, but Femi blocked her number before midnight. The next morning, she traveled to Lagos without informing him. She went to the serviced apartment where they were often met, but her access code no longer worked. A security officer told her that Chief Femi had instructed management not to admit her. Blessing waited outside for 3 hours until Femi's driver arrived. The driver handed her a bag containing clothes she had left inside. He also delivered this short message. She said you should stop creating trouble. The relationship is over. Blessing demanded to speak with Femi, but the driver refused. She called from another number. When Femi answered, She asked how he could abandon her immediately after she had rejected the man who educated her. Femi replied that her decision had nothing to do with him. He had never asked her to reject anyone. Blessing reminded him of the promises, gifts, and conversations. Femi said the gifts were given freely and did not create an obligation to marry. His words were almost identical to the words Blessing had spoken to Emeka at graduation. For the first time, she understood how cold they sounded when received from the other side. Femi told her never to visit his home or office. He warned that his wife had discovered some messages and that Blessing could cause problems for herself. Then he ended the call and blocked the new number. While Blessing stood outside the Lagos apartment with her bag, Emeka was sitting inside his car on a quiet road between Enugu and Onitsha. He had driven for almost an hour before tears made it impossible to continue. He pulled over and placed his head against the steering wheel. The graduation scene repeated inside his mind. He heard Blessing describe him as a man beneath her standard. He remembered selling his car, borrowing money, postponing business expansion, and defending her against every warning. Yet, the financial loss was not what broke him. He was grieving that the woman who he thought existed. He wondered whether Blessing had ever loved him or whether he had simply been useful. He remembered removing the ring from his pocket and considered throwing it through the window. Instead, he placed it inside the glove compartment and drove home. For several days, Emeka did not open his shop. His employees called Amaka because they were worried. She found him inside his apartment with unopened curtains and untouched food. He looked older than he had 1 week earlier. Amaka did not say she had warned him. She did not insult Blessing or celebrate being correct. She opened the windows, prepared food, and placed urgent business documents in front of him. Emeka said he can no longer care about contracts. He no longer had the strength. Amaka told him that 6 employees and their families depended on the business he had built. She reminded him that Blessing's decisions could not allow him to destroy everything he had loved. Emeka asked why people punished those who treated them well. Amaka replied that kindness did not control another person's character. It only revealed the character of the person giving it. Amaka remained beside Emeka during the difficult months that followed. She helped him restructure debts caused by Blessing's final year expenses and the damaged shipment. She contacted customers who owed money and negotiated payment plans. She encouraged him to stop checking Blessing's social media accounts. When Emeka struggled to sleep, Emeka listened without becoming impatient. She never pressured him to recover quickly. She understood that he was not only healing from a broken relationship, but also questioning his judgment. Emeka felt foolish for ignoring every warning. Amaka reminded him that trust was not foolishness. The mistake was continuing to ignore evidence after the truth became clear. Slowly, Emeka returned to work. He arrived early again, reopened negotiations with contractors, and pursued a supply opportunity he had previously considered too large. Pay remained, but it no longer controlled each hour of his day. Blessing returned to Enugu after Femi rejected her. She expected sympathy from Cynthia, but her friend had become distant. Cynthia was preparing to move to Abuja and did not want Blessing's problems interfering with her plans. When Blessing asked for a temporary loan, Cynthia said her family monitored her spending. Other classmates who had admired Blessing's clothes and connections stopped answering regularly. The private apartment Femi had promised never appeared. The job in his company did not exist. Blessing moved back to her mother's village while searching for employment. Each morning, she woke beneath the same roof she had once believed education would help her escape. Her mother provided food but refused to discuss Emeka. The silence was more painful than anger. Blessings began sending job applications to banks, consulting firms, hotels, and government office. Weeks passed without an offer. Blessing had graduated with a degree, but she lacked work experience and practical skills. During interviews, employers asked how she applied her education outside the school. She gave polished answers, but struggled with real business scenarios. She had stopped helping in Emeka's shop years earlier and has spent much of the university pursuing social status instead of developing competence. At one interview, the panel asked her to create a simple cash flow forecast. She remembered Emeka teaching her the same process when she was his employee, but anxiety clouded her thinking. She failed the assessment. On her way home, she passed a building material store and watched the owner discussing prices with a customer. For the first time, she understood that Emeka's knowledge had not been inferior because it came without a degree. He had learned through responsibility, risk, and years of disciplined work. 3 months after graduation, Blessing sent Emeka an apology. She wrote that she had been confused and influenced by friends. She said Chief Femi had deceived her and asked for a meeting. Emeka read the message but did not respond. Blessing called his old number and discovered it was no longer active. She contacted one of his employees who said Emeka had instructed everyone not to discuss his private life. Blessing interpreted the silence as anger that would eventually pass. She believed their 7 years together had created a bond strong enough to survive her betrayal. She did not yet understand that while she had been waiting for Femi to return, Emeka had been learning to live without her. Silence was not a punishment. It was a boundary. Emeka's big business began recovering with Amaka's financial guardians. He reduced unnecessary expenses, introduced better inventory controls, and stopped giving excessive credit to unreliable contractors. A hotel group awarded him a major contract to supply plumbing materials, lighting fixtures, and bathroom fittings for 3 new properties. The contract was larger than anything he had handled before. Emeka considered rejecting it because he lacked enough working capital. Amaka helped him prepare a professional proposal for a bank facility. She attended meetings with him and explained financial terms without making him feel inadequate. The loan was approved, and Emeka completed the contract ahead of schedule. The hotel group recommended him to other developers. Within a year, he opened a large warehouse and employed 14 additional workers. The same man Blessing had considered beneath her level, sitting in meetings with architects, engineers, bankers, and investors who respected his judgment. Emeka also began studying again, not because Blessing had called him uneducated, but because the business had required a level that required new knowledge. He enrolled in a weekend executive courses in accounting, negotiation, and supply chain management. Unlike Blessing, he did not use education as a weapon for measuring human value. He treated it as a tool. Amaka often joined him in the evenings to review assignments. Their friendship became deeper, but neither of them spoke about romance. Emeka remained afraid of trusting another woman, and Amaka refused to take advantage of his vulnerability. She had loved him quietly for years, but understood that affection offered during another person's pain could easily become dependence rather than genuine choice. She wanted Emeka to heal before he saw her as anything more than a friend. Blessing eventually found work as a receptionist at a small real estate office in Enugu. The salary was far below the lifestyle she had expected after graduation. She accepted because her savings had disappeared. The handbags Femi bought were sold one after the other to cover transportation, rent, and food. The jewelry she once displayed proudly turned out to be less valuable than she'd believed. One necklace she thought was gold was only plated metal. When the buyer tested it and announced its true value, Blessing nearly laughed at the painful symbolism. She had rejected a dependable man for a relationship that looked expensive but had no longer lasting worth. Everything had glittered beneath hotel lights. Nothing remained when the lights were switched off. At the real estate office, Blessing learned that Femi had a reputation for relationships with young women. Several agents had heard similar stories. He promised internships, apartments, investments, and marriage without putting anything in writing. Once a woman demanded commitment, he disappeared. Blessing was not the first, and she would not be the last. That discovery destroyed the belief that their relationship had been special. She remembered every warning sign she had ignored. He never introduced her to respectable members of his family. He never allowed her to visit without permission. He never paid for her education, supporting her mother, or stood beside her during difficult moments. He had purchased access to her happiest hours while Emeka carried the weight of her ordinary life. One evening, Blessing's mother finally spoke about the graduation incident. She said she had not been angry because Blessing refused marriage. Every person had the right to choose a partner. She was angry because Blessing had humiliated someone who deserved honesty. You could not have told Emeka privately that your feelings had changed, her mother said. You could have stopped collecting his money when you began dating another man. You could have allowed him to keep his dignity. Instead, you waited until he had completed your education before announcing that he was beneath you. Blessing started crying. She admitted that she had continued the relationship because she was afraid Femi would not pay her fees. Her mother shook her head and said, "That means you knew who was dependable. You simply wanted another man's appearance while keeping Emeka's sacrifice." Those words remained with Blessing. She began writing down every amount she could remember Emeka spending on her: tuition, rent, books, laptop, food, medical bills, project fees, transportation, and monthly allowances. The total frightened her. She knew she could not repay it soon, but she started saving a small portion of each salary. At first, the savings were motivated by her graduation promise. Later, she understood that money could not repair what she had done. Even if she returned every naira, he could not return the years Emeka had spent waiting, the business opportunities he had postponed, or the dignity she had taken from him in public. She continued saving because the discipline forced her to face the size of his sacrifice. 2 years after the graduation humiliation, Emeka realized that his feelings for Amaka had changed. They were reviewing accounts inside his office when electricity failed. Amaka switched on the rechargeable lamp and continued working without complaint. Emeka watched her explaining a calculation to one of his younger employees. She was patient, respectful, and completely comfortable in his world. She had never asked him to become someone else before considering him worthy. She encouraged growth without using his weakness to shame him. Emeka remembered how she had cared for his business when Heartbreak made him abandon it. For the first time, he wondered what his life would look like if the person beside him was not a temporary helper, but his wife. Emeka did not propose immediately. He spoke honestly with Amaka about his fear of loving again. She told her that part of him still expected every act of kindness to be followed by betrayal. Amaka said she did not need to pretend the past had disappeared. She only needed him to avoid making her pay for another woman's choices. Their families already knew each other, but they spent months discussing values, finances, children, faith, careers, and expectations. Emeka discovered that peaceful love did not require constant anxiety. Amaka did not disappear for days to test him. She did not hide him from colleagues. When she introduced him at company events, she described his achievements with pride. She never referred to herself as the educated person helping an uneducated businessman. She called him her partner. News of Emeka's relationship reached Blessing through an old classmate. At first, she refused to believe it. She assumed Amaka had taken advantage of his pain and that Emeka was using the relationship to make her jealous. She sent another message asking to meet. This time, Emeka replied. He agreed to a conversation at a restaurant in Enugu. Blessing prepared carefully. She wore the simple engagement ring Emeka had given her years earlier, hoping it would awaken memories. She rehearsed an apology and imagined him admitting that he still loved her. When she entered the restaurant, Emeka was sitting on a corner table. Amaka sat beside him. Blessing stopped walking. The calm familiarity between them frightened her more than public affection would have. They looked like two people who had built trust through countless ordinary days. Blessing sat opposite them and began apologizing. She admitted that she had called Emeka her uncle because she was ashamed of his age and educational background. She admitted that she had dated Femi while collecting Emeka's money. She blamed Cynthia's influence, university pressure, and her desire to escape poverty. Emeka listened without interrupting. When Blessing said Femi had deceived her and abandoned her, Emeka finally asked, "Would you be sitting here if he had married you?" Blessing opened her mouth but could not answer. Emeka repeated the question. She began crying and said suffering had helped her understand the value of genuine love. Emeka replied that suffering sometimes produces regret without producing love. A person could miss the security someone provided. Old ring from her finger and placed it on the table. She said she had kept it because part of her always belonged to Emeka. He looked at the ring but did not touch it. He reminded her that she had removed it long before graduation and had described him as nobody important to Femi. Blessing asked for one final chance. She promised to spend the rest of her life correcting the mistake. Emeka told her that he had forgiven her, but forgiveness did not erase consequences. He introduced Amaka as the woman he planned to marry. Blessing turned towards Amaka and accused her of waiting for an opportunity to take him. Amaka remained calm. She said, "I did not take Emeka from you. I helped you stand after you pushed him down. What grew between us began only when he was ready to live again." Blessing asked Emeka how he could throw away 7 years because of the mistake. Emeka replied that the betrayal was not one mistake, it was a long series of decisions. She had removed her ring, hidden their photographs, changed his name in her phone, called him her uncle, lied about movements, collected his money, dated another man, and publicly humiliated him. Each action had given her an opportunity to stop. She chose to continue. Blessing whispered that people would change. Emeka agreed. He said he hoped she had changed and would build a good life, but he was no longer willing to test that change with his peace. Before leaving, he pushed the old ring towards her. "Keep it, not as a promise. Keep it as a reminder that something does not become worthless simply because you once failed to recognize its value." Emeka and Amaka married 6 months later. The ceremony was elegant but intimate. Emeka's employees attended with their families. Business partners traveled from different cities. His mother danced with tears of joy, not because the wedding was expensive, but because his son had recovered the happiness she feared he had lost. Amaka wore a simple ivory dress for the church service and traditional attire for the reception. During his speech, Emeka thanked her for loving him without treating his wounds as an opportunity. He said she had shown him that loyalty was not loud. It appeared in hospital, waiting rooms, business crises, unanswered calls, difficult conversations, and ordinary evenings when nobody was watching. Videos from the wedding spread online amongst friends and families and relatives. Eventually, one reached Blessing. Blessing watched the video alone inside her small apartment. She saw Emeka laughing as Amaka fed him cake. She saw the new warehouse in the background of a pre-wedding photograph and realized how successful his business had become. She saw educated professionals listening respectfully, As Emeka spoke, the man she had once considered beneath her standard was now living the future she had imagined, but he was sharing it with a woman who had valued him before the applause. Blessing paused the video with the camera showed Emeka's mother's embracing Amaka. She remembered the same woman welcoming her years earlier. She remembered promise never to hurt her son. Blessing typed a congratulatory message, read it several times and deleted it. She understood that inserting herself into their wedding joy would be another selfish act. Months later, Femi contacted Blessing unexpectedly. For one hopeful second, she wondered whether he wanted to apologize. Instead, he asked whether he still communicated with a former classmate whose father had become a government official. Femi wanted an introduction regarding a property contract. His request confirmed that he still saw people according to their usefulness. Blessing refused. Femi reminded her of the gifts he had given her and suggested she owed him a favor. Blessing almost laughed. She told him gifts did not need purchase permanent access to a person, repeating the same lesson he had once used against her. Femi insulted her and ended the call. Blessing blocked his number. It was a small action, but it marked the first time she chose dignity without waiting for another person to rescue her. Blessing worked hard at the real estate office. She arrived early, studied property documents, and learned from experienced agents. She stopped exaggerating her lifestyle online. She took professional courses and volunteered for difficult assignments. Over time, she became an assistant property manager. The promotion did not make her wealthy, but it gave her honest confidence. She continued saving money for Emeka, although she no longer expected repayment to restore their relationship. She also apologized to her mother and began supporting her regularly. The consequences of her choices remained, but she stopped using shame as an excuse to avoid responsibility. Regrets could not reopen the door she had closed, but it could prevent her from destroying every door ahead. 3 years after graduation, Blessing's company set her to negotiate the supply of building materials for a new estate. She entered the conference room, carrying documents and preparing to meet the owner of a large distribution company. When the door opened, Emeka walked in. He was dressed in a well-fitted suit and greeted everyone with a calm authority. Blessing froze. She had known his business was successful, but had not realized he owned the company selected for the contract. Emeka appeared equally surprised, but he remained professional. He introduced his team and invited Blessing to begin her presentation. Her voice trembled during the first few minutes, then steadied. She explained pricing, timelines, and project requirements clearly. Emeka asked detailed questions that showed a stronger understanding of construction logistics than anyone else in the room. After the meeting, Emeka congratulated Blessing on her presentation. She thanked him and said she had finally learned that education meant little without discipline and character. Emeka told her that she appeared to be doing well. There was no bitterness in his voice, but there was also no invitation to return. As Blessing prepared to leave, she noticed a framed photograph on his office shelf. Emeka and Amaka were holding a baby girl. Besides the photograph stood an award recognizing Emeka's contribution to regional business development. Blessing smiled sadly and said, "You became everything I thought Chief Emeka was." Emeka shook his head. "No," he replied. "I became what I was already working to become. You stopped looking because someone else arrived with a brighter car." Before Blessing left his office, she apologized one final time. This apology was different. She did not blame Cynthia, Femi, poverty, university culture, or confusion. She said, "I made those choices because I wanted the appearance of success more than I valued the person who truly loved me. I knew I was hurting you, and I continued, because I believed you would always remain available. I was wrong." Emeka thanked her for speaking honestly. He told her that one terrible season did not have to define her entire life, but he also reminded her that growth did not always restore what had been lost. Sometimes, growth simply taught a person how to avoid repeating the same destruction. They shook hands and Blessing walked away without asking whether he still thought about her. That evening, Emeka returned home to Amaka and their daughter. He told his wife about the meeting and showed her the envelope. There were no secrets between them. Amaka listened and asked how he felt. Emeka said he felt peaceful. Years earlier, he had imagined that seeing Blessing regret her decision would bring satisfaction. Instead, he felt compassion and distance. Her suffering did not return the years they had lost, and her apology did not threaten the life he had built. He had finally reached a place where Blessing's choice no longer determined his emotions. Amaka held his hands and reminded him that healing was complete when a person no longer needed the offender to suffer. Blessing also returned home that evening with an unexpected sense of relief. Seeing Emeka's family had hurt, but he had ended the final fantasy that he was waiting for her. She understood that love was not a chair someone could abandon for years and expected to find empty upon returning. Emeka had forgiven her, rebuilt his life, and chosen someone capable of honoring what she had rejected. Blessing stood before a mirror and studied the woman she had become. She was no longer the proud graduate humiliating a man before a crowd. She was no longer the frightened young woman standing outside Femi's apartment with a bag of rejected clothes. She had made serious mistakes, facing their consequences, and finally accepted that regret did not grant ownership over another person's future. The title of this story is All That Glitters because Blessing's greatest mistake was not simply choosing one man over another. Her mistake was confusing appearance with value. Chief Femi had the expensive vehicle, luxury apartment, polished speech, and influential connections. Emeka had loyalty, discipline, sacrifice, and a clear intention to build a home. Femi offered excitement without responsibility. Emeka offered responsibility without spectacle. One looked like success from a distance. The other was quietly creating it every day. Blessing recognized the difference only after the glitter had faded and the gold belonged to someone else. There is also a lesson in Emeka's journey. Loving someone sincerely does not guarantee that the person would treat your love carefully. Sacrifice should never require a person to ignore repeated disrespect. Emeka believed patience would restore the woman he once knew. He kept giving because accepting the truth felt more painful than continuing the illusion. Yet, the same loyalty that made him a good partner also placed him at risk when it was not balanced with boundaries. His healing began when he stopped asking why Blessing had failed to value him and started protecting the life that still remained. Amaka's roles remind us that genuine love is often revealed without performance. She did not arrive in a luxury vehicle or make dramatic promises. She helped Emeka reopen his shop. She reviewed unpaid invoices. She encouraged him to eat when heartbreak destroyed his appetite. She respected his intelligence while supporting his education. Most importantly, she did not demand his love as payment for her kindness. She allowed him to heal and choose freely. That patience created the secure relationship Blessing once believed money and status could provide. Blessing's ending was not complete. The Blessing's ending was not complete destruction because the consequences now are not always the end of a person's story. She lost Emeka and the loss remained permanent, but she eventually stopped blaming others and began rebuilding her character. She learned that remorse was more than crime because the decision produced pain. Genuine remorse required honesty, responsibility, and changed behavior. She could not return to Emeka's home, but she could avoid bringing the same selfishness into another relationship. She could become grateful. Disciplined, and truthful. Her second chance was not another opportunity with Emeka. Her second chance was the opportunity to become a better person. Now the question is yours. Was Emeka right to reject Blessing after she apologized and tried to repay him? Should he have considered the 7 years they shared and give her another opportunity, or did her long deception destroy the trust required for marriage? So people will say Blessing was young, influenced, and eventually changed. Others will say she did not return because she loved Emeka, but because the wealthy man abandoned her. Tell us what you believe in the comments. Would you have taken Blessing back after everything she did, or would you have made the same decision as Emeka? And consider one more question. If Chief Femi had divorced his wife and married Blessing, would she have ever apologized to Emeka? Would she have remembered the car he had sold, the fees he had paid, and the years he'd waited? Or would she have continued believing that she had moved to a better level? Sometimes people do not regret the pain they caused. They regret that the alternative they choose failed. Understanding the difference can protect a wounded heart from reopening a door that should remain closed. All that glitters is not gold. Something gold looks ordinary because it is being shaped through work, patience, and sacrifice. Sometimes what attracts every eye is only polished metal that loses its shine when tested. Blessing spent years chasing the brightest object in the room. By the time she understood what she had abandoned, Emeka found a woman who did not need the world's approval to recognize his value. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to remember that loyalty is worth more than appearances. Like the video and subscribe for more emotional Nigerian stories about love, sacrifice, betrayal, forgiveness, and the choices that change lives forever. And as you leave your thoughts in the comments, remember this: never become ashamed of the person who stood beside you when the people you are trying to oppress did not even know your name.